CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson.
Hey now, welcome to another edition of CFL 110. Michael Remis here in the host chair for the vacationing Andrew Hustler Paterson. Pumped to be joined here, wrapping up CFL Week 5, looking ahead to CFL Week 6. Pleased to be joined by my co-host, Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. Jeff, how's it going?
Remo, good to see you in the host chair. Yeah, Hustler's gone fishing in one of his many adventures over the year. I don't know if we've done this in the seasons we've done CFL 110. I guess this being our second season. If we've done this before, have you been the host for this? I know we've done it in Winnipeg Sports Talk, and it's always a blast. But this might be your first time hosting CFL 110.
Yeah, Winnipeg Sports Talk we've had many conversations. This is my first time with CFL 110. I'm feeling very cool and professional here in the box, in the Hustler chair. So we're going to run down. We've got a lot of topics here on the side we have to get to. We'll start off with the highlight of Week 5, the Stampede Bowl, where the Calgary Stampeders win the inaugural game, 37-16 over the Blue Bombers. Calgary now improving to 3-1 and giving the Bombers their first loss of the season, also at 3-1. What did you think of the team's performances in that game, but also the presentation of the first ever Stampede Bowl?
Yeah, there's a lot here to talk about. Let's talk about the game first. So obviously, I'm going to take the words from head coach Mike O'Shea post-game. The Bombers got their asses beat, and this was, I don't know any other way to explain it. They got their butts kicked by a team that was coming off the bye week, that a Calgary team, Remo, that we were pleasantly surprised by their start, but we didn't really know who or what they were. We didn't know if they were as good as their 2-1 start was, because you look at some of the opponents they had played. They had played a Hamilton team that didn't look good early on. They had played a Toronto team that's still reeling without Chad Kelly as their quarterback. And then they lost a game to the Ottawa Redblacks in what was a game that was severely hampered by the weather, but it was still at home. So you're like, okay, they went through the East. This was supposed to be their biggest test against the, at that point, 3-0 Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and they passed with flying colors. I thought Calgary was dominant, and they were particularly dominant early on to the point where they could kind of coast in the second half. And one of the big parts of why we had such early promise for Calgary was the play of their defense. Well, we all know, Remo, when it comes down to 3 or 4 plays, turnovers are going to have such a big impact. And when you're turning over the ball the way the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were, notably quarterback Zach Collaros having not one but 2 pick sixes, you're not going to win the game when the opposing defense is scoring about as many points as you're putting up. As you know, there was a garbage touchdown in the at the end of the game. So a massive, massive win for Calgary. I do think it shifts the narrative in the West. I think you have to look at that tier that we were looking, that top tier that Huss and I discussed last week was, had nestled in at Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. Calgary's very much in that tier after that performance. What was your biggest takeaway on a team that, or in a game that I think a lot of people, despite it being on the road for Winnipeg, expect it to be an easy Bombers win?
Yeah, for the Blue Bombers, I think maybe some concerns about Zach Collaros' decision-making there. Maybe some ill-advised passes leading to those pick sixes. And for the Bombers, you're kind of waiting for this breakout game for Dalton Schoen. He was injured all last year, left this game with an injury. Sounds like he's going to be okay, but they have had other guys emerge. But it's hard not to have those comparisons when you see Kenny Lawler going for 200 yards in the Hamilton game. So I think offense, the pick sixes, a concern. We've seen him, tear up Edmonton, but how is he going to go against tougher defenses? And I did get a kick out of Dusty and Glenn Suter at the end of the game being like, when have you seen Zach Collaros throw 2 pick sixes in a game? And then had a recall to last year's Grey Cup, and then they started laughing on the broadcast. And you had that familiar feeling of, this obviously wasn't a Grey Cup, but they did have the Grey Cup style trophy presentation with the Stampede Bowl. You had the commissioner there, Kate Burness, on stage lifting the trophy. So there were certainly some flashbacks combining with Nikolai Ehlers signing with Carolina. It was a tough day for Winnipeg sports fans on that Thursday, losing the Stampede Bowl. But credit to Calgary. They had quarterback questions. Vernon Adams has been a great fit there so far. And, 3-1, they're definitely in the conversation now in the West with Winnipeg and Saskatchewan.
There's like we said off camera before this show, there's so many little stories that have come out of each game. Like, for instance, and we don't need to spend a lot of time debating on it, because when it comes to Mike O'Shea and how stubborn he is, we already know what he would have done. I know there's a big debate on whether or not they should have pulled some of their players, particularly Zach Collaros, from the game, even after his second pick six, which put the Bombers down by, I think, 4 touchdowns at that point. And with 12 minutes remaining, I think you can make an argument there that you should pull him out, protect him. O'Shea is never going to do that with that much time. He would consider, these are my words, not his. He wouldn't refer to this, but in his head, that would be loser mentality, giving up on the game. But when there's minutes left in the game, Remo, and it's, I get the CFL's crazy. You can come back from anything, seemingly. 21 points with minutes remaining is not one of those situations. And if you watch Zach Collaros scramble around the pocket with with just moments to play in a game that's going to end in a loss, you have to wonder what would happen if he went down there or got injured. The criticism that I think would extend beyond, would certainly be outside of that room. I think it would even extend into that locker room. But you asked before, the ending. The ending is even funnier to me. I love the fact that they did this Stampede Bowl. It's the first ever Stampede Bowl, which in this case, I'm not going to say it launched the Stampede, but it was the day before the official start of the Stampede. It was great timing. And before this, people ask, well, why is this the first ever? Why did this happen? Well, they used to use the Stampede as a reason not to have a home game because of the chaos, because of the attention and the dollars being spent other places. They'd prefer to be away. I like that they're embracing it this time, but the issue here, Remo, and I can say this, it's going to be Winnipeg and Calgary for the foreseeable future for this Stampede Bowl, I'm told. And had the Winnipeg Blue Bombers won, like many had predicted, including the odds makers heading into this game, that ending would have been a disaster. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers would never have got onto stage. They never would have celebrated, maybe would have played ball, but from what I gather, they went to the room. Had they been asked to come out and do this presentation, they unequivocally would have said no. So that's something to think about in the moving forward as they play more Stampede Bowls, and we don't have to talk about the inaugural one, but I'm super interested because you have a bit of a different take on the value of something like a Stampede Bowl, including what I would consider too much of a celebration at the end.
Yeah, I was very fired up for the Stampede Bowl. I think it's a good idea. We have the Banjo Bowl. It's, brings a lot of people in here. It is a rematch. But here, if you create something that's an event around the Stampede, like you bring in concerts on the Friday of Grey Cup weekend, why not have it a Calgary Stampeders game part of the Stampede? I've never been to the Stampede, but now I'm like, hey, if the Bombers are there, I would maybe go check it out and travel down there. I liked bringing in Brett Michaels for halftime. I thought that was pretty cool. Bring in whoever you want. I think you've seen BC make it work with Snoop Dogg and LL Cool J and 50 Cent. So if you have a marquee game, you can bring people in. Was the celebration on the stage for a regular season game a bit over the top? I don't know. Yeah, but did I like it? I think I did. You had the commissioner there. You had Kate Burness. You had the trophy. I thought the trophy was awesome.
What'd you think of an MVP?
I think you need more awards. Used to have like John Madden give his MVP at the end of Monday Night Football. Why not do something like that? They got a belt buckle? Like, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm all for naming MVP. So I thought the idea of it was great. And if the Bombers won and they wouldn't have come out, it makes it interesting. But now, okay, I think it sets the stage for a rematch. And maybe you have the Bombers against the Stampeders for best 2 out of 3 and move on to the other teams. So we'll see what happens going forward, but I like the idea. And sure, make a marquee game you can argue if it's manufactured and that's not a real thing. Sure, but nothing's real, so you could say that about anything.
Fair enough. I do think though, and I will die on this hill, you could scale back the celebrations, and I'm foreshadowing, or at least I'm giving the league a heads up that you might have to if the game doesn't turn out the same way as it did this year, because I don't see Mike O'Shea changing his ways from this year to next year. So just something to keep in mind, and understanding it's going to be these two teams that are going to be scheduled to play in the future.
Okay, I think there were a lot of questions. And
you've never been to Stampede. I know we got to move on to the next one, but you've never been to Stampede. I've been a handful of times. You don't need a Calgary Stampeders against Winnipeg Blue Bombers game that week to sell that party. It's a lot of fun. It's a great atmosphere. The city completely transforms. I've seen it in covering games that lead up to this one. They decorate the entire city. It's got a great energy. Go down and check out the Stampede if that's your thing.
We'll have to do that. We'll move on to the Friday.
And we'll take a check from Tourism Alberta. Thank you.
Move on to the Friday night game. Hamilton Ticats dominant 51-38 victory over the Toronto Argos. A number of things happened in this game, Jeff. Kenny Lawler, 207 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. I thought, in week 1, I'm like, hey, this guy could be an MOP candidate with the way Bo Levi is just chucking up to him and he's going up and grabbing it. Bo Levi, 40,000 career passing yard milestone passed in that game. He's had an interesting year, and he was an MOP candidate last year. This year, off to a bit of a slow start as he returned to form. And finally, we did have 2 kickoff return touchdowns, winning Roy Leister $1 million as part of the Save On Foods promotion. So that was a wild game, tons of scoring, and it mentioned a guy winning $1 million from it. What did you think of the Friday night game with the Ticats winning 51-38 over Toronto?
Yeah, I'll address the last part first, with Roy Leister winning the $1 million. That's amazing. And what's also great about it, Remo, I feel like, covering this league for a decade and having watched this league prior to that, that return for a touchdown promotion is just like embedded in my head, and for that to finally pay out, that's really exciting. I know we were talking again off camera about different times that I had seen it come close. It's so funny. The thing I can recall was years back when Mike Miller, who's the current special teams coordinator for the Bombers, was a special teams GOAT playing for Winnipeg. He got called at a time, I believe, I'm very confident about this, but maybe not 100%, about 99% confident. It was during a time you couldn't challenge, because I remember it being a phantom holding call on Miller. Like, the replay was bad, and yet they called it on him, and it negated Winnipeg's return or kickoff touchdown, which of course you need one, I think, from each team. To get this done. And then that was like he robbed this person of a million. And I remember going in there a couple of days later when the Bombers were back at practice. I wanted to talk about the fact this person essentially, I guess you couldn't argue. You could argue at that point got robbed for sure, but there was a penalty on the play. I went and asked, and it's really funny. The guy started calling Mike Miller Mike Millie for costing this fan $1 million. So they're a little inside joke. As for the game, vintage Bo Levi Mitchell. I mean, that 5 touchdown passes, 3 to Kenny Lawler. I think Kenny Lawler. Now, it was one of those games. I'm not saying, I'm not taking away at all from the 207-yard performance, 3 touchdowns to Kenny Lawler, because you got to give him a ton of credit, because like him, like Eugene Lewis, like all the better receivers in the CFL, they turn what are dubbed 50-50 balls, so those toss in the air, much more in their favor, right? It's more like a 70-30 or 80-20. Yes, some guys, Kenny Lawler included, it's probably 100-0. And a couple of those looked like 100-0. It's like, it looked like, and which again is a credit to him, but it looked like backyard recess football in some respect, where you chuck it up to your number one target, the best player on the field, and certainly Kenny Lawler, as far as receivers, is just that, and you hope he comes down with it, and he did. Some of the receiving, it's very difficult to cover a guy like Kenny Lawler. Receiver had fallen a couple times. Some looked easier than others, but it still doesn't deny what a connection between the two. And to your point, Lawler puts himself in that conversation early on. Unfortunately for Lawler, you need a few things, receivers in general, not just him specifically, to be an MOP, a true MOP candidate. You need the quarterback injuries, which we've been seeing this year for sure. So that puts him into play. And you need the touchdowns. And that's never really been an issue with Kenny Lawler, even if he isn't racking up 100-yard, in this case, 200-yard games. He has a penchant for the end zone, which begs the question then, Remo, what do you think Bomber fans were feeling watching that kind of performance, watching what really Lawler has been able to do in Hamilton since signing in the offseason, knowing that the Bombers had the option, of course, to bring him back and didn't want to spend that money to do it?
I think it stings a little when you see Janarian and Grant take one back in the Friday game, and then Kenny Lawler go for 3 touchdowns as well. That's in the same game. So I think salary cap is driving all of it. Dalton Schoen and Zach certainly had a connection in the past, but Kenny and Carrick, Carrick Wheatfall's stepped up this year. So I think one game isn't going to change your mind, but it shows you the Bombers have let some really good players go, but their defense seems to be better this year than last season, although they did lose on Thursday. Just in this game, Jeff, you're wondering about Bo, Levi, Mitchell. Is this a return to form for him or an outlier performance against a struggling defense? And for me, I'm going with a performance against a struggling defense. You've seen good quarterbacks. They can tear up struggling defenses. And I know Bo was an MOP candidate last year, and I forgot about this coming into this year, but all of his yards, not all, but I felt like a lot of his performances where the defense would give up a ton of points and he would be getting a lot of his yardage when they were down. And you saw that in the game against Saskatchewan, and you saw that in the game against Calgary. Now, I'm not sold on Bo Levi. I think he can have big games, but I'm not sure if this is a return to form for him.
I think it's a fair question. I think it can be a bit of both. I don't necessarily think... I think Bo Levi answered a lot of questions last season, right? His age has been the back of mind for everybody. Does he still have, the arm? He's been injured for the, prior to this season and last season, even though he was injured parts of last season, he suffered injuries through the previous 3 or 4 years that really questioned his durability. And I think he put that to rest last year. So even with a slow start this season, there were high expectations that he was going to take his MOP caliber, right? He won the East Side, couldn't get it done over Brady Oliveira in the West. But to your point, he did that in a lot of ways exactly the way you described, Remo, being down in games, forcing to chuck the ball, not establishing a run game, right? It was more often than not last year, you could really see the reliance on Bo Levi Mitchell. And even during that time early in the season, as Scott Milanovich was not contemplating, chose to bench him for Matthew Shiltz, and it was because of a series of injuries that he got it back. During that stretch, if you'll check, he was racking up the passing yards. He was throwing for over 300 yards a game. They were just losing by multiple scores. So it didn't really matter what he was doing. I feel like this team now and they had to deal with a lot early on. I'm not making it an excuse, but, Ted Gavaya, well-liked across the CFL. And again, I'm not blaming or using this as an excuse. That's a heavy thing to have your GM going through the cancer battle that he's doing. So there's a lot of people talking about the organization. Obviously, everyone has Team Ted, and again, not using it as a negative, but I think it was going to take time with what Ted built over the offseason. Even though they have a lot of the similar pieces on offense, it was going to take some of the new pieces on the O-line, certainly some of the new pieces on defense to gel. And I think that's what we're seeing. As I would say, for the first few weeks of this show, particularly when it came to betting on games, it's a crapshoot. There's lots of teams. For years, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers benefited from that continuity. We know how much players transfer from team to team, year to year. So it takes most teams a bit of time, 3-4 games to get into their groove. So I don't see this as necessarily being just against a struggling Argos defense, which you can absolutely make that case. Wynton McManus is, if not the best, one of the best defenders in the CFL, and his absence from defense is as significant, possibly even more. Hard to say that because of the role a quarterback plays compared to Chad Chad Kelly on offense. Like, that's how big of an impact he makes, especially for a roster that usually experiences the most turnovers. There's certainly an argument to be made that Bo Levi did that against a weaker defense in the league. We will want to see that from, against other better defenses across the CFL. But I do think the Hamilton Tiger Cats have brought themselves back into the conversation in the East, can grow in this, because that's one of the things that they've been known for, is those growing pains early on in seasons. If they can get past this, continue to grow here, while Montreal seemingly reels without Davis Alexander behind center, I think you could see a real race in the East Division, where I think even 2 weeks ago no one was envisioning that.
Yeah, I will say I'm enjoying this Bo Levi, Kenny Lawler connection. Major yardage coming for Lawler this season. Moving on to the Saturday game, it looked like Montreal was going to win over BC, kicking a field goal with 30 seconds left, but Nathan Rourke, in his return from injury, leads BC down the field for a field goal with no time on the clock. BC winning 21-20 in the dying seconds. Just a fantastic finish on Saturday night. And then after that, you had, I don't know, a big fight on the sidelines with multiple players involved. What did you think of the game and Nathan Rourke's return? And will we see any disciplinary action from the post-game shenanigans?
Yeah, just basic observations from the game. I did think it was, I think it was a good game for Nathan Rourke. I think he looked a lot better in his return to the lineup than Drew Brown looked for the Ottawa Redblacks. I was expecting more growing pains or more issues for Nathan Rourke returning from the oblique injury, right? That's a pretty, obviously it wasn't super serious, but it is an important part of your body as you twist and turn with your core. So I was expecting probably more issues with him, but he played well. And then you look over in Montreal, like, they just don't have the same swagger with McLeod Bethel-Thompson behind center. And I wouldn't even say it's McLeod Bethel-Thompson's fault that they lost this game. There were some drop balls. Charleston Rambo dropped what looked like would be a clear touchdown early in that game, and that kind of dictated the rest of his performance. He was pretty much irrelevant in that game, minus a pass interference call that he generated later in the game. But he's not, like, he doesn't have the same chemistry with Tyson Philpott, right? Like, there's things missed. There's just that chemistry missing. And again, I hate the word, but I'll use it because I think it applies here. That swagger that Davis Alexander brings. And especially that swagger, I'll transfer that or transition that to the end of the game. I mean, I understand in this league, you're faced there with a field goal that will put you up, but there's going to be enough time for a Nathan Rourke offense. You want to limit that time, whether it's Nathan Rourke or any offense in the CFL. 30 seconds can sometimes feel like an eternity. So you want to limit as much time as possible. So I understand the focus not being too ballsy, if you will, at the end and trying to go for a touchdown. But to me, it seems so obvious that they were willing to give it back to the BC Lions. I think that conservative play calling certainly hurt them. What especially hurt them is the unnecessary roughness call on Montreal. And I forget, is Lestage, Olivier, or someone that I had the name before. Anyways, doesn't really matter. Kind of does, because the same guy pushed a TSN camera during the game, which he's going to get fined for. That 15-yard unnecessary roughness penalty, and you saw Jason Moss just combing up and down the sideline, wondering who did that, because it pushed them back essentially to their 15-yard line to punt. And that just was a series of errors that led to the BC Lions getting to a 44-yard kick. Because that's the other part. Shaun White's an awesome kicker. Watching that game, the broadcasters must have called him arguably or the best CFL kicker in history based on his percentage. But here's the thing about the knock against Shaun White. They don't even try in the same community to attempt a field goal that they do with Sergio Castillo. Like, he doesn't come out for 55, 57 yards. So you do need to get to a 44. I'm not saying he can't hit a 50-yarder, but he's about the lowest of a guarantee when it comes to 50-yarders because he just doesn't do them enough. So the BC Lions had to get into a position where it was a reasonable field goal, and they were able to do that with about 30 seconds on the clock. So you just look at that game, and you have to, especially if you're the Montreal Alouettes, and sure, you can look at the tape throughout and identify all the things you didn't do right or wish you could have done better leading up to that point. But it really does boil down, quite frankly, to the last 2 minutes of the game and why you lost this one.
Yeah, Nathan Rourke, 22 of 36, 352 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, but moving it with his legs as well. 8 carries for 43 yards. And a big game for Justin McInnes, who's been pretty quiet this year. 6 catches for 109 yards. And finally,
we didn't even get into the brawl, Remo.
Oh, yeah, we didn't
even get into the brawl. I just felt like I was talking too much. But that brawl was, to me, and we don't – look, I'm expecting the commissioner to come out and deliver massive fines on this. And I know some people are like, oh, what do you mean? Like, it's football. It's a violent sport. Stuff like this happens. I'm not denying that stuff like this doesn't happen, that a violent game like football can't, turn into a melee like you did. And it's not like I'm thinking this is the grossest thing you've ever seen in professional sports, but for a league that prides itself on community and being a family and all these things, again, families fight and all that stuff. But when you see guys throwing haymakers at the end of a game, you can discuss back and forth about why the guy wanted to talk to another player near the Montreal's dressing room. This wasn't a John Tortorella situation where you had a player who was trying to demand his way into an opposing team's locker room and need to get his head knocked off. This is a guy who was too close to comfort for players. Obviously, things escalated, but the reason why I say the league needs to come here with some actual teeth here, Remo, is because this year, as the president of the Football Reporters of Canada, I get to meet with the league every year. In fact, we got everybody on the FRC to be part of this presentation from the league this year. They went over the increased fines and penalties on misconduct plays, and they put a special emphasis on delivering headshots with your head, your fist, whatever, any aim towards the head, even in situations where you're viewed as throwing a haymaker towards a guy and you miss, you don't even contact, that can result. I actually think it does result in a game ejection. So for the timing of this situation to happen at the end of a game with no time remaining, so there isn't even like a fourth quarter that you can be ejected from, or even 5 minutes of a critical game, this would be 0 penalty if that was the case. I'm interested to see how the league handles this, how Stuart Johnston handles this, and what I would argue is one of his biggest situations as far as player discipline / player health that he's had to address since taking over this year.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see if anything happens there. And moving on to the last game of Week 5, it was the Edmonton Elks getting their first win of the season. Trey Ford, who had looked solid for 3 quarters in the previous game against Winnipeg, kept it together for the entire game. 15 of 17, 212 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Near perfect passer rating. Edmonton improves to 1-3 in the 39-33 win. Mark Killam, his first win as head coach, and for Edmonton, this is their first win at home in July in years. And you look at Ottawa, did mark the return of Drew Brown, who had missed 3 games with a hip issue, but Ottawa not able to overcome this one. Redblacks now 1-4. What do you see from both of these teams in this game and moving forward?
Yeah, you know what? I think if you're Edmonton, you can, if anything, you can just breathe a sigh of relief, right? Like you needed to get a victory. You needed to get a win for so many different reasons. Obviously, to compete in what is shaping up to be a pretty competitive West Division, right? I mean, if all things keep going the way they are, it's going to be tough for BC to carve out a playoff spot, let alone for the Elks to kind of make a comeback. Obviously, there's tons of season left and lots to play out, and certainly no one's in trouble at this point. But with Edmonton and just what you've seen for the last few seasons, as you mentioned, the difficulties this team's had generating wins early enough in a year, right? And have been left, there have been moments, including last season, where the Elks were viewed as the hottest team in the league at this point, and yet they reel off a ton of wins or a great streak, and they miss out in the playoffs because of the crappy football they played early on in the year. So they needed to stop the bleeding. They need to stop the bleeding at home. There was another first too, Remo, with the return touchdown. right? Like Javon Leake returning that touchdown. That was, I believe, the first return touchdown in Edmonton in close to a decade. They hadn't returned a touchdown in that long. It's just been such a weird drought that I happen to follow just because of my CFL rundown columns I do every week. It's just something I've been kind of sticking with, waiting to happen. So that occurred as well. And again, the victory was just a massive piece of the puzzle. Would it have been extra special to be against a Western team? Absolutely. Would it even been better if they could have figured things out before that against Winnipeg? There's no doubt. But this team need to get things done. Trey Ford looks like he's getting progressively better. He looked his best against Winnipeg. And so to follow up that performance with another strong performance where he went 10 for 10 to start the game. And I think he finished 15 for 17, right? That's a great percentage, not a ton of throws. And that's in a big part because they were able to generate those plays on special teams, but most notably was their ability to get Justin Rankin going in the run game. He was an absolute beast. He finished with 2 touchdowns. One was a 74-yard dash. The other one was a 45-yard catch and run. I think that got the Elks on the board and started this, but that's the kind of style of game that you want to have, right? You had the Edmonton Elks get up to an early lead, take some pressure off the defense. They did slip up a little bit, but were able to capitalize down the stretch, get the victory. Ottawa, I think, again, there's no panic button here right now for any team really, but Ottawa, it's just you're left kind of wanting here, right? This is a team that had high expectations heading into the year. For some people, were their picks out of the East Division to represent at the Grey Cup, and we're just not seeing that. The last beef I'll say about Ottawa, and it's kind of just to get off my chest, Bobby Dice has to be one of the worst head coaches when it comes to clock management. Like, there were times in that game where there just seemed like no urgency down 2 scores in the CFL. Like, their uses of timeouts are just embarrassing. And that needs to be addressed. Like, that's like one of the things that you really do control as a head coach is game management. And you're just not really seeing it done well in Ottawa. And of course, we know how much Drew Brown loves to throw the ball. I know they were incorporating the run game in and have been here, but that needs to be, when Drew Brown is tossing 316 yards on a night where it doesn't look like he's tossing the ball too much, it's not because he's lighting up the opposing defense. It's because he's relying too much on it. So on the pass. So I think that needs to become a little bit more complimentary, but again, lots of time here. And while Nathan Rourke looked better than him in his return to the lineup, we still need to remember that Drew Brown had missed 3 games with a hip issue and is still a baller and going to get this team on the right track here moving forward.
Yeah, one player who'd been quiet so far this year, Khalil Pimpleton, who was pretty electric last season, 6 catches, 68 yards, and he did have a punt return touchdown as well. And Ottawa, for me, concerns with the defense, too many games where they're just allowing too many points. 39 to Montreal, 31 to Saskatchewan. You had that weather game in Calgary, which they won 20-12. But then again, Toronto's putting up 29, Edmonton 39. So the average points per game a bit too high. They did make the playoffs last year. They seem to have quarterback figured out if Drew Brown's healthy. We'll see if they can improve on that going forward. And that ends our wrap-up of the previous week, Week 5. Looking ahead to Week 6 now. Only 3 games this week, which I found interesting. And we're starting off on Friday night here. Saskatchewan hosting Calgary. Big battle of the West. Saskatchewan at 4-0. Calgary 3-1, coming high in off of their big win in the Stampede Bowl. Jeff, bringing that I don't know if they travel around with the trophy.
Yeah, do you think that goes city to city there, Remo? You think they take that on the road with them?
It's like the championship belt of the CFL. But this is a big West Division game. Saskatchewan, they're back in off the bye, and both teams solidified at quarterback. And we saw Calgary put pressure on Zach last week and disrupt them. But Saskatchewan's got a very strong defense, and they will be at home. What do you think about the first matchup of Week 6?
This has got to be the game of the week, right? For the reasons you mentioned, Remo, you have the only unbeaten team in the 4-0 Saskatchewan Roughriders against a team that's riding hot against following a victory against the other team that I think people thought was the best team in the league with Montreal Alouettes, right? That 3 group. So I like Calgary in this. I like the momentum. I feel like these teams, I might be getting this wrong. I'm channeling my conversations with, I want to say former Stamps reporter, but he'll always be a Stamps reporter to me, and Danny Austin, and how these games are always tight. Like they always battle each other. They're always, and especially when you're looking at West Division dominance here. Like, I mentioned before, right? It was great that they were getting wins early on against Eastern teams. We needed to see what Calgary could do against the West, and they proved they're up to the task in that win against the Bombers. So I think, but then you have to play into this, Remo, and we're going to see it in a couple weeks' time when the Bombers go back to Calgary off the bye week. They're going to be prepared in a very similar situation that the Stamps were in when they played Winnipeg, of course, getting that bye week the week before to prepare. So that's the situation that Saskatchewan finds themselves in against the Stampeders. So how much of that, how valuable will that time be? And I look at the spread here, and it's what, +5 right now? Is it +5 here? I think that's what it was the last time I checked.
+5 for Calgary.
It's just an interesting number. It's an interesting number, and when you start getting over 3s, you start thinking about backdoor covers, right? Is this game going to be a backdoor cover game? Is it going to be are we going to view Calgary trying to figure things out against Saskatchewan late in the game? I don't know. This one's a tough one to predict. I've been kind of so-so on both of these teams. When I say so-so on the Saskatchewan Roughriders, I know they're a really good team. They were the team. I keep saying this. They were the team that I picked to win the Grey Cup early on and pulled back because of those injuries on the O-line. But they are a good team. So I think Saskatchewan wins this game. But I think, like we've seen the Riders play pretty much all season against most of the opponents, have, whether it's down 2 or up 2 or close, regardless, they've come within that 1-score game. So I'm going to take the Stampeders with the points in this game against the Riders. And I do so not feeling extremely confident, but if I'm going to be confident in a Stampeders team, it's going to be right now following their victory, even with the Riders coming off a bye.
Yeah, Vernon Adams, he had MVP caliber season last year. They brought in Nathan Rourke, and he overtook him as a starter, so I like the fit with Vernon Adams in Calgary. Saskatchewan, they'll have to keep Trevor Harris clean pocket. When he has time to throw, he can find the receivers, but some concerns if he's going to be getting pressured and hit. We'll move on from the West showdown. We'll go over.
Oh, so you're copping out? You're copping out on these picks then? You're not making a pick? You think you can sit in the big? You think you can sit in the big chair and just go with the flow and go with the motions? You're not going to put your reputation on the line this week?
I was just in the host chair. I didn't realize you were the one who was making the picks.
I know you're producing behind the scenes, but you're still there. You have to pick one, Remo.
I like what your train of thought. I think divisional game, Calgary coming in hot. 5 seems like a lot. I think it'll be a close one, so I would go Calgary, but that could be some recency bias there with what we just witnessed. But I think that's, for a divisional game like that with 2 great teams. So I'll go with you.
Okay, you one prediction, you're already drowning. Let's go. Let's move on to the next one. Let's see. You were going to go with me the first one. Now you got to have in your mind you're picking the next moving forward here.
Okay, we're moving on to the second game of the week. Hamilton, who we just talked about in that crazy game on Friday, hosting Ottawa, coming off a loss. Hamilton, 51 points against Toronto. Bo Levi Mitchell, he just passed 40,000 career yards. He's hitting Kenny Lawler for touchdowns. He's looking pretty good. And Redblacks, 1-4. And Drew Brown, another week. Is he going to look more comfortable? But I really like this Ticats receiving group led by Kenny Lawler. And how are they going to perform against Ottawa? So Ottawa gave up 39 to Edmonton. You have to think Bo Levi is salivating here, just chucking it up to Kenny Lawler over and over.
Divisional game again, though. Like, to me, like that, and the marker being 4.5 points for obviously for Ottawa, I'm or not obviously for Ottawa, obviously for Hamilton, but getting the 4.5 points is Ottawa. Just with their record right now, with just one victory under their belt, and that being, as mentioned, a heavily affected weather game earlier this season against Calgary, I think there's going to be, again, not panic, but urgency for the Redblacks. And if urgency results in a 4-point or less loss, that would be an incredibly disappointing outcome for the Redblacks. I'm not buying into the hype just yet with Hamilton. I know they've been playing better. I know I've talked about them, being a team that would take some time to get going. I think Ottawa is in that same situation, just a week behind them because of the injuries to their starting quarterback. So I think that Drew Brown, with being back, playing a game with that hip issue. Braylon Addison's another guy I hope is back for Ottawa. I don't think his injury is super serious. He was almost like a security blanket for Drew Brown in that week 1 game where he threw over 400 yards. His absence from the lineup, I think, was felt this last game. If he can come back, I think the Redblacks are more than capable of going toe-to-toe, shot for shot with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So if it turns into a slugfest on offense, I don't think that the Hamilton defense is going to get the job done necessarily. So I'm going to take the Ottawa Redblacks with the points as a rebound game and an urgency game for them to get them back into that fight in the East Division. They're already starting to see that momentum from Hamilton. They can't give them that extra game to make it more difficult for to mount a comeback in that division.
Yeah, if you had urgency game, that reminds me of Edmonton last week. You felt that they really needed that one at home against Ottawa. And I think I would go the opposite way here. I would pick Hamilton. We just mentioned Ottawa's defense, Bo Levi at home. And you talk about slugfest. This game does have the highest total of the week at 53.5 points. I don't think either team particularly strong on defense here. We mentioned Ottawa. Hamilton just gave up a ton to Toronto. But I think Hamilton can put up points. We saw this connection with Kenny Lawler. I will go Hamilton minus 4.5 at home. We got the final game of the week, Jeff. BC going into Edmonton. Edmonton trying to make it 2 in a row, and BC, their second game in a row with Nathan Rourke. We saw earlier this year Nathan Rourke put up some big numbers, but are the Elks building momentum? So I think this is kind of the lower card. If we got the top dogs on Friday, Calgary at Saskatchewan, this is kind of like the little brother match with BC at Edmonton. But BC had some big aspirations coming in. You had Rourke miss a couple games, but with him back, this offense should be humming a bit more. And I feel like everyone just puts up, huge numbers against Edmonton.
Yeah, this one is going to be, I find these games, while being a match short, to all be very intriguing, and all pretty much for the same reason, that they're all interdivisional. And this one are the two teams, like when we talk about the tiers, right? We've moved Calgary into that tier with Saskatchewan and Winnipeg, and then it's kind of a sizable drop. So like the BC Lions, they're a team that, at least prior to this season, has come in with high aspirations under Rick Campbell and just could never get it done. There is no such thing as a rebuild in the CFL. So I'm not suggesting that, Buck Pierce coming over to BC was going to be a year off for them, or that they weren't expecting to get back to the playoffs and into the Grey Cup. But that being said, there's some moving pieces here, but this is becoming a critical juncture for both teams. I imagine the BC Lions thought they would be off to a hotter start than they are. Certainly the Edmonton Elks were hoping they would be. I don't think everybody was suggesting they would be, but certainly they were hoping to be. And now both teams who have generated some momentum here, some much needed momentum, is going to end that momentum here. So which team are we thinking is going to do that? I like what I've seen from Edmonton over the last couple weeks, again, against, competing, close to the end of the game against Winnipeg, and of course winning this past week here against Ottawa. But I just see it as a very difficult situation against BC, a team that put up 4 straight touchdowns on them in week 1 to really turn that game. Yes, Edmonton played them tightly in that first half. I just look at the coaching here. I look at the quarterbacks involved. Nathan Rourke looked like the Nathan Rourke that we know and have come to admire in this league. So can he take, and that was his first game back. Will he take another step? I think so. Again, I put the urgency more into, of course, there's urgency in Edmonton. I just think BC has higher aspirations this year to compete for the West. And because of that, I'm going to take a BC Lions that are are favorites at 3.5 points right now on the road. I'm not suggesting the Elks are going to come crashing back to earth, but I do think I think they're going to have an off game here against a team that's going to be that's coming in here with Nathan Rourke, and I'm expecting to have a big game against a struggling Elks defense.
Yeah, you got the battle, Canadian quarterbacks with Trey Ford and Nathan Rourke, and you just saw what BC did to them earlier on in the season. Another game to get some reps. You've seen what Edmonton has given up on defense throughout the season. So I would lean BC as well this one. And you mentioned the tiers. Just looking at the CFL futures here as we wind this show down, Jeff. You do have the Montreal Alouettes as the Grey Cup favorite, plus 240. Then Saskatchewan, plus 325. Winnipeg, plus 375. Then a bit of a gap there. Toronto, the defending champions, battled with injuries, roster turnover, plus 950. You got in the West, BC, plus 1,000. Calgary, plus 1,200. And then you have
love for Calgary. The odds makers just not buying it.
No, yeah, they're kind of slow to adjust. Maybe there's value if you think Calgary can go on a run here. Edmonton way down there, plus 5,000. And then in the East, Hamilton, plus 1,050, and Ottawa, plus 1,600. So the odds makers thinking Montreal, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, and then the rest of the CFL if you're going for futures.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's a bit of disrespect there, obviously, with Calgary and maybe the odds makers not really buying into that 3-1 start. I do think, the Montreal one, they are respecting them. I think they're going to be a much different team when Davis Alexander returns. I just think he brings a much like Chad Kelly does in Toronto, brings just a significantly different dynamic to the game, so to the offense. So I think there's certainly I understand them being where they are despite their struggles right now. But yeah, I mean, this is the beauty of the Canadian Football League. Like, we are going to see teams fall off a cliff. We're going to see teams rise from the ashes. I mean, I make the joke here, and it's funny because it's kind of true. Like, when is Saskatchewan's 7-game losing streak kick in, right? I mean, they've had that for the last 2 years. That's looking like it's not going to happen here. And I'm not taking a shot at our neighbors, our neighbors to the west. I'm saying this stuff happens in the league all the time. Like, there gets to a certain point, the teams that are 1-5, 1-6, or 2-4, 2-5, whatever it may be, they start getting this urgency as we start getting deeper into the summer, and they go on these mini streaks. They start putting up more competitive games. Like we saw it with Montreal last year. It was like they were toying with children through the first couple months, and then they were like clinched the East and took their foot off the gas, right? Like, and it allowed other teams to pick up wins and whatever. So I've always, on the betting aspect of the CFL, it's a unique league unlike any other. So you need to look at rhythms, patterns, different things. And I'm not trying to, get all Einstein here with gambling. I'm just saying the CFL is such a unique league that you saw it last week. I believe Remo, all 4 dogs won.
Crazy.
So there's things that can happen. Momentum doesn't shift from week to week. There are people who are the hottest teams, like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, that lay an egg and get their asses kicked, right? Like, that happens all the time. So it's very difficult to pick, but there are some cool things about this league that become a little bit more predictable when you follow it as much as people like you and I do, and hardcore people that follow the league. It's just, you love the game for what it is, but it can become a very interesting dynamic when it comes to putting money on the line.
Yeah, we're after 5 weeks here, so we're starting to get a sense of who these teams are, getting sense of trends. We saw, 2 teams last week get their starting quarterbacks as well in BC and Ottawa. So a lighter week, only 3 games, but I'm looking forward to getting started Friday, 8 p.m. That's Calgary, Saskatchewan, Saturday, 6 p.m. These are Central Times. Ottawa at Hamilton, and Sunday, 6 p.m. BC at Edmonton. So full weekend of CFL football. Jeff, any last words here as we wrap up this wonderful edition of CFL 110?
Just want to thank you, my man. Really appreciate you going seamlessly into that chair and chopping up the 3-down loop as we do every week. Looking forward to Huss coming back next week, obviously, but also really excited to have done this with you today. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, certainly brought it today, Jeff. No trophies being handed out for regular season games this weekend, but we'll discuss it all next week on CFL 110. So for Jeff Hamilton, I'm Michael Remis. This has been CFL 110. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.